For many of us, weight can be a massive area of concern. Excess weight can put us at risk of things like heart disease and other conditions, and for this reason, many of us are told by our doctors to shed the pounds. But that's a lot easier said than done, and that's why there are millions of people out there looking for that perfect weight loss solution. And that's also why there are billions of dollars spent on prescriptive weight loss solutions every single year. In recent years, one particular medication has boomed in popularity. It originally was used for diabetes, and then they found that it has been extremely helpful for people who have diabetes to lose weight, and now they're starting to use it in people who need to lose weight who don't even have diabetes. Now, I am talking about Ozempic, which is a type of semaglutide medication. For those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Robin Lewis. I'm a naturopathic physician practicing here in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. And today I want to talk to you about all things Ozempic. Now, even though Ozempic has actually been around for a long time, they noticed around 2018, it absolutely started to spread like wildfire. You can attribute a lot of this to its celebrity endorsements, people talking about it on social media, but for whatever reason, a lot of people in recent years have been searching for Ozempic with the understanding that it is an amazing weight loss solution. So I'm going to be talking about Ozempic in the context of weight primarily. Of course, it's used for diabetes, but that's not what we're going to focus on today. We're going to focus on the controversy around using Ozempic or Ozempic-like drugs for weight loss. Now, this is a brand of a particular type of medication that falls under the semaglutide family. So this particular compound is trying to mimic what we call GLP-1 inside the body. GLP-1 is something that our body naturally releases in response to food, and it will help slow gastric emptying. It will help the release of insulin, which is why it's used a lot for diabetes, and it'll help us feel fuller quicker. And that is one of the main mechanisms for its use in weight loss. It acts as an appetite suppressant. It'll make you feel fuller quicker, and for that reason, people end up intaking a lot less food. You may have also noticed that as of 2021, there's a new product out there which is called Wegovy, which is essentially a higher dose of Ozempic, and this medication is geared specifically to weight loss. Whereas previously, people were using Ozempic off-label for weight loss alone, Wegovy is an on-label use of using semaglutide for weight loss. So the plan for today is to go over Ozempic, or if we are speaking more broadly, just the semaglutide family. I want to go over the pros and cons. I want to go over other alternatives that also work on this GLP-1 system, because ultimately you want as much information as possible if you're going to decide whether or not this is the right solution for you. And oftentimes our doctor does not have time to run through all of the different scenarios and really deep dive into why this can be helpful for weight loss. So that's my hope today, is to give you everything you need to make an informed decision on whether or not you think this might be the right solution for you. But before we get into the weight loss side of things, I just want to briefly touch on how it's being used for blood sugar regulation. Now, this particular medication is used for type 2 diabetes, and that is because it helps improve insulin production in response to food. For those of you who don't know what insulin is, it is a hormone secreted by our body to help put sugar away. So when we eat carbohydrates, we will notice a rise in our blood sugars in response to that food as it's getting absorbed into the system. Now, we want to prevent those blood sugars from getting too high, and that's the role of insulin. It helps take those sugars out of your blood and puts it away into places like your muscle and your liver. What happens for a lot of people when this system is abused is our insulin production doesn't quite match the level of blood sugars, and you can end up with chronically elevated blood sugars, aka type 2 diabetes. So this is going to help boost the insulin production to help keep up with elevating blood sugars. Now, I do think it's worth noting that this can sometimes run into a bit of a problem when you're simply addressing insulin issues by boosting insulin. The reason for this is our pancreas, which releases the insulin, can get burnt out with time. So if we're really abusing the system by eating a lot of really high sugar foods and demanding a lot of insulin from our pancreas, eventually it will stop producing insulin altogether. And this is where we get into something like type 1 diabetes, where you need to take an insulin medication because your pancreas just won't produce any anymore. And so what I want to just highlight for you guys is that medications designed to increase insulin can be helpful in the short term, and often they are not helpful in the long term if you're not also doing something to lower your need for insulin. So that's where things like improving insulin sensitivity can come in. So essentially improving the efficiency of that insulin, or modifying your behaviors so your blood sugars don't get so high that we need a ton of insulin. So I just wanted to briefly highlight that because a lot of people don't fully understand that, and then they'll jump in quickly to taking a medication without doing some of these other things that will make that medication go further and hopefully prevent the full-on burnout of your pancreas and the need for long-term insulin use. Now, I will say Ozempic is also helping your blood sugars through its ability to slow gastric emptying, so therefore slow down your digestion and make you feel fuller for longer. So in that way, it can actually decrease your need for insulin because you're eating less. And then this is really where we start to get into how Ozempic's being used for weight loss, is because you're consuming less food because your drive to consume that food has quenched. The GLP-1 system will suppress your appetite at the level of the brain and at the level of the gut. And so for this reason, you tend to lose weight because you're consuming less and you don't want to consume more. So this is a really good segue for how Ozempic, or this particular class of medications, are being used for weight loss. In the most formal sense of this, these medications are really only designed for people who have obesity, which means a BMI above 30, or for people with a BMI above 27 with other weight-related conditions. And I don't know about you guys, but I don't really rely a lot on BMI in my practice. It's not a very good marker of health. It's basically just talking about weight relative to height, which, as we know, muscle can weigh more than fat and things like that, making BMIs not a really good assessment of weight. But nonetheless, the point I'm trying to make here is it's not meant to take you from a size 4 to a size 2. It's really only intended for people who have a lot of weight to lose. It was never designed to get people super, super skinny, although this is how we're seeing it abused a lot in the media. And this is one of the controversies around Ozempic, people using it who don't actually need it. One of the main reasons you don't want to abuse this type of medication is because it suppresses your appetite, which is great for people who have a problem with overeating. But if overeating isn't the reason that you're holding on to those extra pounds, it can actually push someone into a malnourished state because you're consuming less food overall, which means if you're not careful about it, you could be undereating your protein, your fats, your carbohydrates. You could be undereating certain minerals, and different types of deficiencies can start to occur. And you also really want to get to the root cause of why your weight isn't coming off as you expect it to. Because yes, overeating and underexercising is one reason people gain weight, but there's also thyroid issues. There's also other hormonal issues like estrogen and testosterone. There's cortisol issues. Sometimes that weight is a sign of something more serious going on. And maybe it's just the weight that you're paying attention to now. And then when you go on something like Ozempic and you lose the pounds, because inevitably a lot of people will lose some level of weight on this medication, you are going along thinking that you've resolved your issue when really you're just masking the problem and waiting for things to get a lot worse before you start to notice maybe some of these other signs and symptoms of those particular conditions. So you just want to be really careful that you're not losing weight without fully addressing the why behind your weight gain. And quickly circling back to the malnourished aspect of this, what a lot of doctors have noticed when they put their patients on Ozempic is that sure, you lose weight, but they're also losing a lot of muscle mass along with it, a disproportionately large amount of muscle mass relative to fat. And ultimately, when we are trying to get people to lose weight, especially for health purposes, the point is to lose fat and preserve muscle as best as possible. And Ozempic doesn't really specify between the two because it's just consuming less calories overall. And if you're not consuming less calories, but also keeping your protein requirements, then you're going to see a reduction in your muscle mass, which puts you at a risk of a bunch of different health conditions. So if you can see where I'm going with this, it's just you want to be really smart and intelligent about how you're using these medications so that you get all of the benefit with less of the side effects. And lastly, I would really encourage you guys to think about how long you want to be on this medication for. Because if you think about it in the context of, say you didn't have a medication and you were just under eating for a long period of time and you lost weight, what happens when you start eating regularly again? The weight comes right back on. And this is what they're finding in a lot of these long-term studies with Ozempic, where they've put people on for a period of time and then followed them once they've come off of it. And a lot of the times, all of that weight is coming back. Now, if we get more specific about the research, a lot of these studies will boast about the fact that at least half of the participants are losing up to 15% of their body weight, which is very impressive. But what they often leave out is if you follow people throughout time and you calculate the weight they've lost, but also gained back after discontinuing the medication, the weight loss as a whole is closer to 5%. Now, for some of you, you might still see that as a win. I'm not here to tell you how to feel about those numbers, but I just want you to understand that the weight loss can be really impressive while you're on the medication, but there is the risk of gaining it all back, especially if you were just using it to mask some of these other issues that are not being addressed in the background that are very much still there when you come off of that medication. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the most common side effect reported with these type of medications, and that is gastric upset. So yes, it does help you feel more full after meals, but a lot of people will also report really bad nausea, reflux. Sometimes they'll get diarrhea. Sometimes the gut upset is so severe they have to withdraw off of the medication. Now, for a lot of you, you might be thinking, well, it's okay to have a little bit of a stomach ache as long as I'm losing weight. But what I would argue is a lot of people already have bad enough stomachs to begin with. And in fact, most people who come into my clinic have something going on with their gut, whether it's simple bloating or gas, sometimes constipation, diarrhea, sometimes much, much more severe than that. But the point I'm trying to make is gastric issues, so gut, intestine, colon, are already super rampant, and this can certainly perpetuate the problem. And the other reason I really care is because your gut health is super cornerstone to the rest of your overall health. Issues with your gut health or your microbiome health have been linked to cardiovascular disease, metabolic syndrome, autoimmune conditions, diabetes. To be honest, it can affect almost every single aspect of our health because a good portion of our immune system's found there, our nervous system, the neurochemicals that are very much linked to things like depression and anxiety are made in our gut. Our gut is very important for our overall health. So if we have to sacrifice the health of our gut in the pursuit of weight loss, that is something I want you to really take seriously, because a tummy ache might not feel like that big of a deal, but ultimately it can affect your overall health quite drastically. And this might be a side effect that you have to take into consideration if you're weighing the pros and cons of going on something like Ozempic. Okay, so that's my take on Ozempic. I think there are some things that need to be spoken about and thought about before going on the medication. Yes, there is no doubt that it works for a lot of people when it comes to weight loss. I just want you to be educated about what you're signing up for. As a naturopathic doctor, here in BC, I do prescribe, but I do tend to reserve it for a last-ditch effort when we have investigated all of the other potential causes and really tried some of these gentler approaches before opting to medication. So that's what I wanted to talk about at the end here. What are some alternatives to Ozempic, maybe something along the side of nutrition or herbal remedies that also work on the GLP-1 system that can be helpful, like Ozempic. Of course, because it's not a pharmaceutical grade medication, the strength of it is usually not quite as high. But either way, there are other options that you might want to play around with before hopping on an Ozempic, because in my eyes, if we can get away with weight loss without causing a lot of side effects or some of these other consequences that come alongside with this medication, then great. Okay, so let's first talk about some dietary things that you can do to help boost GLP-1 naturally. The first thing is fiber. So fiber is found in a lot of our grains and vegetables and fruit. And ultimately, fiber can disproportionately increase GLP-1 versus food as a whole. Because as I mentioned earlier, yes, food just entering the stomach will kick off GLP-1, but fiber does this to an even greater extent. And the reason for that is due to our microbiome. So certain bugs that live inside of our gut will digest that fiber and produce short-chain fatty acids. And these short-chain fatty acids will stimulate the production of more GLP-1, and therefore you will get the benefits of that increase in GLP-1, like insulin regulation and like increased fullness and things like that. Now you might be thinking, but I get enough fiber in a day. I eat a couple fruit and vegetables, no big deal. Well, the average North American is consuming a mere 10 to 15 grams of fiber a day. If you want a healthy, thriving microbiome and some of the benefits of fiber, you actually want to aim to closer to 50 grams a day. So that's a huge gap. So if you're not hitting those fiber requirements yet, that might be a good place to start. The other dietary habit that can increase your GLP-1 a lot more is increased protein intake. Now, protein will also disproportionately increase the amount of GLP-1 when it's consumed. And similar to fiber, most of us are not hitting our protein requirements. So a lot of us aren't even getting the bare minimum, which is about 1 gram of protein per kilogram of weight a day. So if someone's 70 kilograms, they need to be eating around 70 grams of protein a day at minimum. Now, if you're trying to change your body composition, aka maybe put on more muscle, lose a little bit of fat, if you're exercising and training, your requirements will jump up closer to a 2 to 1. So in that example of a 70 kilogram individual, you're looking at closer to 140 grams of protein a day. And now I can almost guarantee a lot of you aren't hitting that. So again, this might be a good place to start because it's going to have a really big impact on your GLP-1. And if you can lose the weight through diet alone, that is the best case scenario. Now, the last thing I want to say is our culinary spices can also be very helpful. So these are things like ginger, cinnamon, fenugreek. A lot of those culinary herbs are used, yes, to flavor it, but also can have a really cool impact on GLP-1. So cinnamon, for example, has a very strong relation to blood sugars and GLP-1 and can have a very similar effect as something like Ozempic, but of course to a much lesser degree. And if you are trying to get Ozempic-like effects, you're going to have to consume a lot of it. Now, I'm not saying you should be eating handfuls of cinnamon every day, but every little piece counts. So if we're talking about ways that we can really maximize this, maybe we're increasing our protein and fiber and being a little bit more liberal with some of these spices. Then the cumulative effect can maybe turn into something that we can notice a little stronger than one of those things individually. Now, if we talk about one of my absolute favorite supplements to give someone for weight loss and for similar reasons as to why someone might get put on Ozempic, I'm talking about berberine. Now, berberine also has huge claims around improving insulin sensitivity, and it also can have a huge impact on our weight. And it can also influence our gut microbiome, which is not one of the mechanisms I'm talking about in today's video. That really doesn't seem to be influenced by Ozempic specifically, so it's not like berberine is mimicking Ozempic's effect on the microbiome. That would be an additional benefit of berberine, but nonetheless, you can notice weight loss and blood sugar control with something like berberine. I kind of like to think of it as like a natural Ozempic. Of course, that's overgeneralizing, but berberine is very well tolerated, very safe, and I've had huge success with it in practice. Now, I'm hoping to do a whole episode on berberine soon here because there are so many different things that berberine can be helpful for, and it's one of my more commonly prescribed herbal medicines in practice. But either way, I just wanted to plant the seed today that there are alternatives to Ozempic if you don't want to jump straight into a medication for weight loss. There are some considerations that you want to make when you're deciding to go on any sort of medication or herbal product or any sort of treatment plan in general for the weight. You really want to always be asking yourself, why am I doing this? And is it addressing the root cause? Have I investigated the root cause thoroughly enough? Have I ran the test to make sure that it's not something to do with some of these other hormones that regulate weight? Because ultimately, if you can figure out the why, you can find a medication or you can find a treatment plan that suits that why, and your success will be greater. I hope you found today's episode helpful. If you have any follow-up questions, please comment them below. Thanks again for listening and supporting my channel, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day.